Hi, I'm Rebecca from engVid. In the next few minutes, you'll learn how to write a formal email and what principles you can follow of what you should do and what you should not do. Okay? So when do you need to write a formal email? Because today we do write lots of emails. There's no question about it. And definitely all of them should not be formal. Once we have a relationship with someone at work or outside of work, we don't write formal emails, right? But sometimes you do need to write a formal email. For example, if you're applying for a job, or if you're trying to get a new client, or if you're writing to a university, right? Then you do need to be more formal. And in general, we need to be more formal whenever we are writing to someone that we don't know already. Okay? So that's kind of the way that you can decide if I should write a formal email or an informal email. Okay? So now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to present the 12 principles that you can follow, the 12 kind of rules. And then I'll also show you how to apply those principles by working and checking an actual email, which has some of these mistakes. And then we'll go through it together and you can help me to find and correct the mistakes. Okay? So here we go. All right. So the first thing, and some of these, okay, before I start, some of these might seem really obvious and you're going to say, Rebecca, I know that. But some people don't. I'm sure you do, but some other people don't somewhere. So if you know it, great. If you don't, then just make sure you remember it from now on. Okay. So the first thing is emoticons. What are emoticons? Okay. So emoticons, first of all, are these kind of little cute symbols, smiley faces and things like that that we use a lot today. All right. In texting and so on. But we should not use them in formal emails. Okay. So no emoticons. Next, texting kind of short forms and texting language, such as how are you, written as an R and a U, or why, the word why, written just as a Y, or I see, as in I understand, just written as the letters I see. Now, this is perfectly okay when you're texting your friends or even other people that you know well, but it is certainly not okay to use in a formal email. It doesn't make you look good. You always want to use your best English when you're approaching someone for the first time. Okay? Next. Slang, no slang, and no jokes. Why? Well, slang is just not proper in a formal situation, so you want to stay away from that. And you want to avoid jokes because humor is a very culturally sensitive issue. And what you consider funny might not be what somebody else considers funny. So it's best to avoid the jokes. And by slang, I mean things like saying I screwed up, or instead of saying I made a mistake, or saying I was zonked when you want to say I was exhausted. Okay? Try to find the equivalent proper English word for whatever it is you're trying to express. Okay? Next, try to avoid idioms in a formal email. Now, you'll see that on our website, we have a lot of lessons about idioms and even business idioms. And it's perfectly okay and good for you to learn them and even try to start using them when you're talking to your colleagues at work or other people at work. Again, people and situations with which you're familiar, okay? But if you're reaching out for the first time to someone, idioms are not considered formal ways of expressing yourself. For example, if you want to say that something was extremely easy, use those words. Don't say it was a piece of cake, which is an idiom, okay? If you want to say this was the strategy that I followed, say that. Don't say that was the game plan, okay? So avoid idioms in formal emails. Next. Contractions. Now, this is a little bit tricky because sometimes we can use contractions, but overall, if you're trying to be really formal, then avoid contractions when it's a subject or a verb. So instead of I will contact you tomorrow, say I will contact you tomorrow. Instead of we'll, say we will. Okay? Instead of don't, say do not. Instead of can't, say cannot, and so on. Okay? So avoid the contractions. Don't make it sound unnaturally formal, but keep it formal. Okay? All right, next, avoid abbreviations. All right, what do I mean by abbreviations? For example, even in business correspondence, we often say ASAP. Now, ASAP means as soon as possible, okay? But you don't want to use that the first time you're reaching out to someone, or you don't want to use that in a formal email. Write out all the words, as soon as possible. Also, in case you're communicating in English with people from around the world, they might not know those kind of short forms and abbreviations, okay? And you don't want to make it that they feel bad or they just simply don't understand what you've written, okay? So don't say ASAP, say as soon as possible. And even things like info instead of information, all right? Again, when you know somebody well, you can use those short forms. When you don't, avoid them, all right? Okay, so those were some basic, the first six are pretty basic. Now we come to some little more serious principles that you should follow. And in fact, these are so serious that we have lessons on engVid on each and every one of these lessons, these principles, okay? So if you are not sure when I explain them or you want more ideas of how to do it well, then I'll also show you where you can watch lessons on these. So, number 7, subject lines. What's the subject line? When we send an email at the top, right, what do we see? Whatever somebody writes is the main subject. What is that email about? Now, unfortunately, I do still receive a lot of emails where people are just not writing anything in the subject line. So sometimes there's nothing written, or sometimes they just write re, which means regarding. It's short for regarding, but then they don't write anything after that. Or they write ref, which means referring to or reference to. But again, sometimes they write nothing after that. And that's all really bad because today people are getting so many emails. So if you want anyone to open your email, you really need to write a strong subject line. And there are some very good ways in which you can do that, which I show you in my other lesson. Even if you write a word like meeting, okay? Suppose you're writing to somebody about the meeting. Is that a good subject line? No, that's a bad subject line because what are you saying about the meeting? Which meeting? When? What? So are you saying requesting a meeting, canceling a meeting, postponing a meeting, rescheduling a meeting? Those are the words you need to write, okay? And again, if you want to learn how to write those, I'll show you where you can watch a lesson on that. Okay, next, salutations. So salutations are how we begin and end the letter. Like in an informal email, you just say hi or hey John or hi Mary or even hello, okay? And you might end an informal email by just saying take care, okay, or bye, or something like that, or see you later. But in a formal email, obviously, you don't want to do that. So again, we have a lesson on that. I have a lesson on that where you can learn what's the proper formal way to begin. And that's usually with dear something. If you don't know the person's first name, even if you know the person's first name, you should use the person's last name. Always start more formally with all of this, okay? The thing to keep in mind, the point to keep in mind is to start more formally. And then as you start to correspond with someone and they become more informal, then you can also adjust your letter writing style accordingly, okay? So here you could start with like, Dear Mr. Johnson, okay? And you could end with yours sincerely, okay? Something like that. Again, there is a system of how to start and how to end based on how formal it is. And you need to know that system so that you can use it in the right time. Now, intensifiers. Okay, I have recently released a lesson on this and a lot of people really like that lesson because they were using this word really a lot. For example, really is an intensifier. What does it mean? If I want to say that I was very interested, I could say I was really interested. But you don't want to keep using really all the time because it's rather informal. It's fine to use it when you're speaking. We tend to use it a lot when we're speaking. I just used it. But when you're writing, and especially when you're writing more formally, you want to use something more formal. For example, you could say, I'm extremely interested. Instead of saying, I so appreciate, again, so is informal. You can say, I truly appreciate. I sincerely appreciate. Okay? And these wonderful expressions with intensifiers, you can learn and you can start to use them more naturally in your writing. Okay? It will also show that your English is much more advanced. Okay? Of course, the verbs and the nouns that we use are very important. And sometimes people don't realize that they're using an informal verb. For example, instead of saying, fix the problem, what could you say? This is something we just say casually, right? So we could say, we need to resolve the issue. Or instead of saying, we need to use the new ideas in our company, you need to say, I need to implement these ideas, or implement these recommendations, or implement these policies, okay? And in fact, in my series on Speak Like a Manager, we talk about exactly how to raise your English level by using these kind of very powerful verbs, okay? So you might want to check that out. Also, certain nouns. People have gotten used to using a lot of nouns when we're speaking casually, like stuff, I need to get my stuff. Can you give me those things? Or, hey, you guys. And that's fine in regular, casual conversation, even at work with people you really know well. But when you're writing a formal email, don't use that language, okay? It really doesn't look good. Say what you want to say. Use the exact word. Instead of saying stuff, say material, say presentation, whatever it is you're talking about, say project. Instead of things, say equipment or whatever. Instead of saying the guys in the office, you can say my colleagues, my employees, my team. Okay, use a more professional word. All right. And last is something called redundancies. You might have seen my lesson on this. If not, you can check it out. And redundancies are basically when we repeat words unnecessarily. And this is done a lot without people even realizing it, which is why I also wrote some years ago a resource which you can download, which has a list of like more than 100 redundancies which people are using without realizing. So let me give you an example of a redundancy. So if you say, for example, another alternative. Another alternative is we could meet on Sunday. Well, alternative means another option. So you don't need to say another alternative. That's redundant or repetitive, and you don't need to do it. If you say, we need to progress forward, well, that's also wrong, actually. That's a redundancy because to progress means to go forward. So you don't need this word and you don't need this word, okay? We need to progress and you can drop that other word, okay? So I know there were a lot of different points here, but I hope that step by step you understood them. And what we're going to do now is we're going to look at an email which makes some of these mistakes, and you're going to help me to check it so that you can really remember these points very well. All right, so now let's check this email together and see how we should correct it and improve on it. All right, now this is the situation. So this person, George, wrote an email to his boss, his new manager. So he doesn't really have a very informal relationship yet. They don't know each other very well. So of course, George should be writing in a semi-formal to formal way. But let's see what George wrote and how we can improve on it. All right, so this was the subject line, presentation. Is that enough? Well, it's better than not writing anything, but it doesn't tell us anything, doesn't tell his boss anything about that presentation. So we'll see later how we might improve on that. Okay? So he started the email by saying, hey, Jim. All right, so what's wrong there? It's too informal. We can't say, hey, Jim, to your manager, not the new one. So how could he have started? Let's say his name was Jim Walker. He could have said, dear Mr. Walker. Or if he knows him by first name and if he calls him by first name, then he could have written, dear Jim. All right? Because until Jim is writing back in an informal way, he can't write back in an informal way. Okay. Then he writes, hope you are good. with an emoticon. So, of course, we learned no emoticons, right? So we want to get rid of that. This part was not very good. Hope you are. No, we want to write out the words in full. You are. And also not hope you are good. This whole expression should really be canceled. And what you could say instead is, dear Jim, let's say, I hope you have been well. Let's say you've been away. I hope you've been well. I hope all is well. Then he says, my flight to London is all messed up. So I'll be returning back on Wednesday. So, what's wrong there? Okay, my flight to London is all messed up. So that's slang, and you don't want to use slang. What you could say instead, my flight to London has been delayed, all right, if that's the situation. And so I will be returning, or here you could say, because it's somebody you know, you could use the contraction here. So I'll be returning back on Wednesday. All right. So again, here we have an issue because returning back is what? A redundancy. Because to return means to go back or come back, right? So we don't need to use the word back. So I'll be returning on Wednesday. Again, WED is an abbreviation, and you don't want to use an abbreviation. So you should write out the word, okay, completely. Also, when an abbreviation is used like that at the end of a word on WED, what does that mean? I don't know. I don't understand, okay? So make sure it's very clear, okay? Can you send my presentation to the guys in engineering ASAP? Okay, so a few problems there, right? Can you see them? So here, even though I didn't mention it specifically, of course, when you're writing a more formal email, you should be polite as possible. So what's missing here? We could really say, could you please send my presentation not to the guys, because guys is too informal and very casual. So we could say to the, let's say to the, okay, here he said the guys in engineering. So we could say to the engineering department, to the engineering team, or whatever it means, whatever the situation is. And instead of saying ASAP, you should write out the words as soon as possible. Okay? So that's also an error there. Then he says, thanks. Now, thanks is more informal. So actually, if you want to be a little bit more formal, say thank you. Okay, sorry. Thank you. And take care, again, very informal, so you don't want to say that. You could say best regards. And don't just write G. If his name is George, you should write out his name. Okay? So here you see that even in a short email, there could actually be lots of mistakes when you're trying to write in a more formal way. So pay attention to those 12 principles that we talked about. And that way you will know that your email is written in the right way for the right audience. Okay? So if you'd like to do a quiz on this, please go to our website at www.engvid.com. There you can do a quiz to review these 12 concepts and really know them well. So the next time you need to write a formal email, you'll know exactly how. And then you can also, don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel, okay? Because that way you can keep on getting lots of lessons that I hope will help you to learn English much more efficiently and with a lot more fun and relaxation, all right? And remember those about 6 or 7 lessons that I told you that there are links. So in the lesson description, there are links to my lessons, which have detailed explanations of some of those points that we spoke about. So don't forget to check those out, because that will help you to go even further with your English. Bye for now. All the best with your English.